Christmas store. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, people of Middle Earth, people of all four Hogwarts houses. I've run out of things to say, but I haven't run out of guests to have on this show. Well, actually, I guess you can potentially make a case for that. Joining me tonight, regular friend of the show, regular friend of Disguise coverage of Cover One, Mr. Bruce Nolan from the Bruce exclusive on Buffalo Rumblings. Bruce, how you feeling? Schedule release, super excited, loving it, digging it, all about it.
You know, what's interesting. I mentioned earlier on social media that the schedule release is not something that really resonates with me personally. And I never really dissected a lot of the reasons why that was until I became a content creator. And then once I became a content creator, I started evaluating. I was like, I did not realize that people were this excited about schedule release. Like, people get more excited about the schedule release than they do about the draft. And I'm like, I can't fathom that. But then I realized real quickly, it's because they go to games and they go to away, and I don't go to games ever.
True.
So I completely missed out on the side of my fandom that would be influenced by the schedule. And people who are out of state Buffalo Bills fans, they try and go to an away game.
Yep.
Every year maybe. And for them, they're like planning vacations and weeks off and time around this event. So for them, of course, it's going to be a huge deal. So I think over the last couple of years, I have learned to empathize with that better. And I no longer go, I don't get it. Now I get it. Okay, I get it. It doesn't apply to me, but I get it. So I'm not excited about it, but I'm excited for the people who are. I'm just happy that there's excitement about football and there's happiness in Bills Mafia, and we all get to do way too early schedule predictions just as much as way too early 53-man roster projections.
I like where your head's at. I'm in a similar boat. I mean, growing up in Buffalo, but I enjoy going to a couple games a year. I'm a stay-at-home kind of guy for like Bills games. I think the best seat in the house is in front of my TV. I like just kind of relaxing and sitting back and doing that. And I don't know, to your point, I don't know if that makes me feel similarly to you, because I'm in a similar boat. Like I like seeing the schedule release from the sake of, okay, how do things break down from like a technical and a structural perspective? Okay, like what are our hardest games? Or, what does prime time look like? Are we having to travel on a short week versus this team? When we play our hardest team, what does it look like the week before, the week after, so on and so forth? But it's from a pure like meat and potatoes, X's and O's type of, logistical perspective. It's not really emotional. And yeah, you made an interesting point. There are people who get up way more for schedule release and the leaks and the stories and the tidbits and all these potential things. They get up way more for that than they do for the NFL draft, which, no judgment, is mind-boggling to me, because I just think the NFL draft is such an amazing thing. And I'm like, okay, schedule release, cool, let's talk about it. But I'm nowhere near like, on the roller coaster of excitement, ready to, just scream my face off for it.
I think the thing that's interesting about the schedule release is it really highlights that there's multiple parts of football. And there's the roster building and team construction element of football, which I love, which is why I love the offseason almost as much as I love the regular season. And then there's the actual games and the entertainment and emotion that goes along with the games. Then there's the X's and O's that go along with the game. And then there's the narratives that go along with the season. And this plays into that. The narratives, the ebbs and flows. And the football season is long enough that you can have multiple narratives over the course of a season. Tax O in the comments says 17-0. Sup, gentlemen. Hope all's well. All's fantastic with us. We're here in the
super chat as well.
We're here in. Thanks a lot, Tax. I appreciate it, man. And so for the people who love the schedule release, maybe they're just tied in a little bit more to the ebbs and flows and the narrative that comes along with the football season, because sometimes it's so crazy that every single week can have its own narrative. The vast majority of what my entire show is about, the Bruce exclusive on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast, is about tackling that week's narrative. Because by the time Thursday rolls around, when I go to record on Wednesdays, by the time Wednesday has rolled around, there have been storylines that have come out of the game. And so each week has its own narrative. And then you have each quarter of the season has its own narrative. And then half of the season has a narrative. And then the bye week is like, okay, what are the Bills going to work on in their bye week? And so all this has narratives. And the schedule is the beginning of seeing those narratives form, because the chronology of the games determines narrative. If you did things in a completely different order, the narrative would be completely different. So I think that one of the things the schedule release can tell us about football and about the way that people and fans emotionally respond to football is it's one aspect of what we love about football, kind of magnified and originated.
Oh, I like that breakdown. And I want to segue into a first thing in talking about the schedule for the Bills in 2021. You mentioned the narrative aspect, and in a different sense, granted, but I want to talk about the narrative that a lot of Bills fans continue to push. You and I talked about this off air, the idea of the underdog role for the Bills, or the lack of respect the Bills continue to get, the bulletin board material type things that we see and we hear all the time. And for a lot of Bills fans now, it's come to the primetime game aspect in the schedule. So they've created this corollary between how many primetime games you get scheduled for equals how much respect you get in the NFL, from the league, from the fans. Appreciate you, Rich. Rich saying that you guys are awesome together. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Richard. So the Bills this year, 4 primetime games, not the most in the league. There are several teams that have 5. The Bills are in that second tier with 4. So the Bills are on Sunday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs, which I think is elite. I think Sunday Night Football is the best primetime aspect. They've got the Thursday night Thanksgiving game in New Orleans, which I think is very cool. Then they've got a Monday Night Football game against the Pats. And I also missed the previous Monday night game the week after Kansas City on ESPN Monday Night Football. So 4 primetime games. Bruce, what are your thoughts, feelings around the idea that the Bills only having 4 primetime games isn't enough, that it's disrespectful? And how do you feel about it?
I will level with you. My level of empathy for Bills fans who continually search for something to be disrespected about, and some sort of, I don't know, adversarial other force that is out there in the ether that is oppressing the mafia, is limited at this point. It really is limited. And the reason I have such limited empathy for it is because the Bills for so many years had a boring and mediocre team. They weren't terrible enough to be really even noteworthy, and they weren't good enough to be noteworthy, and they had boring, bad offenses that weren't exciting to watch. And what we did was we conflated that with some sort of national media disrespect. And I just don't have a ton of patience at this point for that narrative, because for goodness sake, Josh Allen got more MVP votes than Patrick Mahomes last year. The Bills had lots of primetime games. There was huge segments on morning shows and Get Up where Mike Greenberg would say the team with the best chance to knock off the Chiefs in the entire NFL is the Buffalo Bills. And a huge segment of his show was dedicated to that. I just don't have a ton of patience for it. Brian Dable won Assistant Coach of the Year, right? There was lots of articles about why Josh Allen should be the MVP. Now he's done something that Ben Roethlisberger has never done and Russell Wilson has never done, which is get MVP votes. So the same Associated Press voters who never at any point gave Roethlisberger or Russell Wilson an MVP vote gave one to Josh Allen. Cole Beasley was second team All-Pro specifically because Peter King thought that the All-Pro team should have a slot receiver, and the first person that came to mind for a national prominent writer of the NFL was Cole Beasley. I think that sometimes we want to think it's that because we don't want to face the idea that for 20 years the Bills were not only bad, but they were boring. And when you're mediocre to bad and boring, you're not going to get a lot of airtime. It wasn't because there was this massive conspiracy to keep the Buffalo Bills and their fans down. So now that the Bills are good, they're right up there with everybody else. Now, it's also important to note that they have 4 primetime games scheduled. Scheduled.
Good point.
But they got flexed last year. Why wouldn't they get flexed again this year? If the games are competitive and they mean something, and it's not just going to be a beatdown, then they might get flexed again. Do you really think that Buffalo and the Jets on Sunday, January 9th is going to be flexed out? No, of course not. There might be no chance that either one of those teams would have anything to play for. And this goes into something we're going to talk about a little bit later, which is the division games being pushed till later in the year. That impacts your ability to get primetime games because they're not going to assume that the New England Buffalo game that takes place on Sunday, December 26th is going to be a competitive game for a lot of marbles. And that isn't a knock against the Bills. It's a knock against the Patriots. But we don't think about it that way. But we should, because it takes 2 to tango. They don't put good teams on primetime. They put good games on primetime. There's a difference. And it takes 2 to tango, baby. If you look at the quarterbacks that the Buffalo Bills are scheduled to play, it's not a great list. 2020 was a good list of quarterbacks for the Buffalo Bills. 2019 was not a good list of quarterbacks for the Bills. One of the things we don't talk about enough when it comes to the Buffalo Bills' defenses and their regression was the fact that they played a markedly significant increase in the quality of quarterbacks in 2020 than they did in 2019. Well, in 2021, it's not as good as it was in 2020. And it's 2 rookies twice off the top of the head, and then Tua Tagovailoa twice. And that's a big part of it. And so when you look at this, you got to understand it. We just have a tendency to internalize all this stuff. And it's 20 years of misunderstanding why your team wasn't on primetime. That's what it does when there's lots of other factors. So that's kind of my take on the whole 4 primetime games. We're being disrespected stuff. I think it's just a little bit narrow focused that we misunderstood and we misappropriated the lack of primetime games for 20 years. And now it's still not enough for us because we're carrying over all that emotional baggage from that time.
Oh, yeah. I think that's very spot on. People are still, and I think even more to the point, people still feel that way. And then I think it gets amplified, like those prior feelings and previous feelings and all that baggage. I think it gets tuned up and amplified even more because now that the Bills are good, now that they have a quarterback that received MVP votes, and now that they have, all pro players and all these different things, I think the assumption is automatically like, okay, well, now we've arrived. Now we should be at the top of everything. We're one of the final 4 teams. That means we should be one of the teams that are played most on TV. And because Bills fans haven't experienced things like that for so long, now that they've gotten a taste of it, it's not just like, well, let's see. It's like, nope. And they go from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. And I think I tweeted yesterday about it. I think primetime games are cool. My favorite game time slot is 1 p.m. on Sundays. I think that's the best thing. But I love Sunday Night Football. Monday Night Football is cool. Thursday Night Football does nothing for me. But I think playing on Thanksgiving is pretty sweet. But the fact that the Bills, they're in the second tier of teams with 4 primetime games. And I think that's fine. Tier 1 has 5 primetime games, and Tier 1 has teams like the Buccaneers, which at this point is self-explanatory, the Kansas City Chiefs, which at this point is self-explanatory, the Dallas Cowboys, who no matter how bad they are, and they're not a bad football team, but even if they were terrible, they're still going to get like at least 3 primetime games. There's all these variables and factors that go into it. And yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's cool that people want primetime games, but I think taking it at this point as like a slap in their face, because there were some people who were genuinely like adamant about how wrong and disrespectful it was that the Bills didn't have the most, or that it wasn't 5 and that it was only 4. And there's also the potential of games being flexed and all these things. and that can potentially happen, that you mentioned, that Joseph mentioned in the comments there about the December 26th game against New England. That could potentially be flex if there's something going on. But yeah, there's that baggage that exists. And I think, yeah, you hit it right on the head. It's carried over. And now that it's like, oh, well, we're sweet, everybody expects to go from one end of the extreme to the exact other end. And I think they're still close. Like 4 isn't bad. It's not like we're sitting here and it's like, well, the Bills went to the AFC Championship and now they only get a Thursday night football game and a something other primetime game and it's only 2. Or even the people that were like, 4 is cool, but the fact that 3 out of the 4 are away is a slap in the face. And I was like, oh, like, I just don't see it. But I recognize where the emotion comes from. And one of those primetime games, Bruce, this is the question that I mentioned to you off air that I was going to ask you, that is off the cuff, that I find relevant. One of those primetime games, the first primetime game for the Buffalo Bills this year, they're at the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, Sunday, October 10th. In your estimation, given who the Chiefs are, given who the Bills are and who we hope the Bills to be, and what the current NFL landscape looks like, is this regular season game against the Kansas City Chiefs the most highly anticipated regular season Bills football game in recent memory?
Yes.
By how much? By a lot? Is there anything?
Not by as much as you think. I think the 2011 game against the Patriots, where Ryan Fitzpatrick and the Bills were undefeated going into Foxborough, was really, really high. And if you remember correctly, after that win, the Bills were on the front cover of Sports Illustrated. And there was a whole story about it. Because at that point, the question was, are the Bills back? And I think that the first time you emerge from mediocrity, I think that that is a big deal. So I do think that this is a more anticipated game, because the question isn't, are the Bills back? The question is, are the Bills a Super Bowl contender? Now, I would make an argument that they are, regardless of whether or not they beat the Chiefs. And this is something we need to talk about. Okay. The Bills might not necessarily have to beat the Chiefs to get to the Super Bowl, because that's not how this works. This is not the NBA, right? So the Chiefs could get bumped off in the first round. They lost to the Raiders last year. So if Aaron Rodgers comes to the Broncos, the Chiefs could not win the division. Like, that's a possibility. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's possible. Like, there's a reasonable path you could go through in your brain to end up at that conclusion. So for me, I don't think you need this measuring stick against the Chiefs. And if you lose, all is lost. Now, if you win, that certainly means a little bit something, because it was a little bit like the Patriots. You gotta beat the man to be the man. And so instead of playing them twice a year, we might play them once this year and then not play them again for 3 years. That's a possibility. But in our heads, we need that validation. In our heads, we need that validation of, in order to be the man, you got to beat the man. And so the thing that I think is interesting, that we probably shouldn't talk about, but we're going to anyway, because it's not something that happens very often, but I just think it's fun. The Chiefs game takes place, the measuring stick game that we're all going to consider it to be. It takes place before the trade deadline, which I think is fascinating. Because if you made these investments, in your defensive line that the Buffalo Bills did, with this idea that you could potentially affect the passer for Patrick Mahomes, the way that you saw the Tampa Bay Buccaneers affect the passer in the Super Bowl, although it's not going to be the same because the Chiefs have upgraded their offensive line. But if you said, okay, clearly we need to do this if we want to have a shot to beat the Chiefs, and then you go in and it doesn't work, or you have that cartoonish situation where you plug one hole with your finger and then another one pops up, and then you're trying to plug that one, right? Yeah. If that's the scenario, Brandon Beane has shown that if there's an opportunity, I mean, he swung a trade for Kelvin Benjamin at the trade deadline, which in retrospect was not good use of assets, but he did help us win. He did help us win the snow game against the Colts, and the Bills don't make the playoffs and break the drought without that. So there's part of that too. But the point was, he made that trade because he was like, you know what? I want to make sure I'm taking advantage of an opportunity this year. So I understand I want to build for the future, but I also don't want to miss out on an opportunity in front of my face. So if you play the Chiefs on Sunday, October 10th, and typically the trade deadline's early November, if that's the case, you've got a week or two where you can say, you know what, maybe just a little bit more and we could do it. And I just think that's fascinating. I think if you're going to have a measuring stick game, having it before the trade deadline is better than having it after the trade deadline.
I like that a lot. I think that's a very interesting point, and a point that I really enjoy and I really like. Yeah, that's fantastic. They are, I don't even think just for the AFC, and I recognize Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl, but I don't know, the Chiefs are a really high standard for the league, and seeing where we stack up against them at that point, because again, I think it's at the point in the year where, you know, having it be in early October, it's not like if something happens at the end of the year, you can't do anything about it. But if it's too earlier in the year, and then it's kind of like, well, they weren't in rhythm, we weren't in rhythm, we're still kind of figuring out who we are. It's at the point of the year where teams are starting to get more comfortable with who they are. So the results of that game will be telling one way or the other. And I like that idea that the results of that potentially is like, listen, hey, our goal was to affect Patrick Mahomes like this, and we didn't in this first game. So now how do we address that going into the deadline? That's a very interesting point. That whole stretch, that adds even more to it now for me. That stretch now, as we start to talk about how this actual schedule has been constructed. Bruce, you mentioned one of the things earlier about how the back end of the schedule is really backloaded with division games and division matchups. The stretches in this schedule, there's several that really stick out to me. Having the opener against Pittsburgh is one that I don't want to, I'm so superstitious, I'm going to knock. And I don't want to jinx. I like that game against Pittsburgh, and I like the week 2 against Miami. I like the tests early and how we can potentially get into rhythm. And then Kansas City and Tennessee, I think people are still forgetting that Tennessee was a good team last year. I know they were abysmal on defense and they lost several pieces, but those are 2 interesting games back to back. Then we have the bye week relatively early. The fact that the bye week comes in week 7 very early. And then things really start to kick into gear after like the 3rd week we come out of the bye. We get Miami, we get Jacksonville, we get the Jets, and then the part of the schedule that I think is the toughest, despite the fact having to go to Kansas City and go to Tennessee in back-to-back weeks, home against the Colts, who I think the Colts are a really good football team. Then at the Saints, even without Drew Brees, they're still a good team. Home against the Pats, at the Bucks, home against a Carolina team that should be better. And then we're at the Pats again. That stretch in the back third of the year with Indy, the Saints, New England, Tampa, and Carolina is the one I have my eyes on the most, other than looking at the back-to-back primetime games between at Kansas City and at the Titans. But is there a stretch that you have your eyes on in particular that is either going to tell you something about the Bills or you're focused on for one reason or the other? Or is it all just kind of moot and however it shook out is however it's shaken out?
That was literally the stretch I had circled on my, you literally stole it from me. And what I wrote down next to it was one of the things that you try to do as you go through the years, you try not to stack losses. And when you look at this team, if you told me, Bruce, you absolutely have to find me a losing streak. The Bills are going to have a losing streak. Where's it going to be? I'd point to this one. I point to Colts, Saints, Pats, Bucks. If they were going to have a losing streak, that would be it. Because on a lot of these other teams, you have some lesser teams splattered in to stop any skid that might happen, right? Yep. You get the Chiefs, Titans, Dolphins, Jags, Jets. And you go, okay, well, that's not it. Steelers, Dolphins, football team, Texans. Goodness gracious. The Texans are probably not going to be good, right? Yeah. And like the, the Joseph in the comments saying a mini bye week before the first New England game, right? It's a mini bye week before the Chiefs too, because you have the Texans. I mean, come on, guys. Listen, if I can't hate on the Texans, like if we're at a spot now where I can't hate on the Texans, we've gone too far. We've gone too far as a society when you're not even allowed to hate on the Texans at this point. because of the organization. The only reason why we're not talking about the organization being a tire fire as much as we were earlier this offseason is because Aaron Rodgers took the headlines away. That's it.
Ooh,
That's the only reason why we're not talking about what a tire fire the Houston Texans are. So that's a game with you absolutely, you don't just have to win that game. You have to demolish that game. Mm-hmm. So if I were going to pick a losing streak, you said, Bruce, you absolutely have to pick a losing streak. It would be Colts, Saints, Pats, Bucks right there.
What do you think is, I'm assuming the hardest game in that stretch for you would be the Buccaneers game, yes?
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you think is the second hardest game in that stretch?
The Colts.
Oh, that was my take as well. Good call.
The Colts. I think that if Carson Wentz is just Phillip Rivers, that's still a tough game. People forget the Colts almost beat us in the wild card round last year.
They took it to us in a lot of ways, like 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1s, where it was like, all right, we just need to get a yard, and they just broke through. They gave us a lot of problems. We were 2 ridiculous Josh Allen and 2 ridiculous Gabriel Davis catches away from doing absolutely nothing in the first half.
Wins are not a quarterback stat. If you're going to assign them to a quarterback, assign the Colts game to Josh Allen. He is the reason why the Buffalo Bills won that game in the large plurality, because the defense didn't stop Phillip Rivers and the tight ends ripped us a shred. There is a really significant part of me that wants Carson Wentz to just not be as Bree Goodbye 607 in the comments says, not be as good as old man Rivers, right?
He threw it down,
But at the time when Carson Wentz was at his best, he was with Frank Reich. And there have been multiple discussions about how close they were and about how the offense just wasn't quite right. And Carson Wentz didn't really have a lot of faith in his offensive coaches after Frank Reich left. And now they're reunited. So one of the reasons why everyone was connecting the dots in the offseason is because they were really significant dots to connect. Sometimes it just makes sense. The first one was Phillip Rivers going to Indianapolis with Frank Reich. Everyone was like, okay, yeah, he had his best season under Frank Reich in San Diego when everyone thought, people forget about this with Phillip Rivers. People thought Rivers was done like 5 years before he was actually done. And he had a resurgence under Reich. People forget about that. They thought he was going to be the first one of that group to die off. As far as the Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, everyone thought the first one to go was Phillip Rivers. And they had a resurgence. And he had a perfectly reasonable year last year in Indianapolis. But he doesn't have nearly the arm talent at that stage in his career as Carson Wentz. I mean, he has, quintuple the children, but not necessarily the arm talent. So because of that, I think that there's always a possibility that Carson Wentz has a more significant ceiling. And I think Joseph brings up a good point in the comments. I was more afraid of the Colts than I was of the Ravens. I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. The Colts were a worse matchup than the Ravens for the Buffalo Bills. And I think that played itself out. And so for me, I think the Colts are the second hardest in that stretch because the Saints, if the Saints get Taysom Hill, okay, let's say that Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston's not the quarterback, it's Taysom Hill. Tell me what the significant differences are between the Saints and the Ravens. If the Saints get Taysom Hill. So if Taysom Hill is the quarterback for the Saints, you have a heavy pressure-based defense that runs a lot of man coverage on the back end. You have a quarterback who is dangerous as a runner, right, but underdeveloped as a passer, with a lot of intermediate throws on offense. Does that sound like anyone you know? Because that sounds like Baltimore to me. So I have to give you trouble, but I think the Bills' success against the Ravens would give me more confidence than I would have against the Colts, which is why I think Colts are the second hardest pick in that stretch.
I like those takes. I'll work my way back from that. The Saints, I like that Saints-Ravens comparison. I like the Saints as a football team, and I think they have good coaching. And Kamara is legit, and he's my favorite player in the NFL. And I think Michael Thomas is phenomenal. And that would be my real only worry there. I like some of their other weapons, but I mean, those are 2 all-pro dudes that are legit, and they've got talent on defense. And I think they're no joke. Like, that's a good football team. And same thing with New England even as well. I think a lot of people are still just, well, they have Cam Newton, ha ha ha, they're a joke, and people forget about all the opt-outs they had last year and the reserves that they had to bring in just to fill roster spots, combined with the fact that even though they overspent for a lot of guys they added this offseason, they're a significantly better football team this year than they were last year, and they are not going to be a pushover. So that's definitely why that stretch is so difficult. But Indianapolis, yeah, I don't know if it's maybe I potentially have a soft spot for Carson Wentz because he carried me to multiple fantasy football championships in 1 year, but I still think he's still got something. I still think he's a good QB, and I feel like a lot of people forget if he doesn't tear his ACL against the Rams that year, granted the story ended up being, Foles comes in and the Eagles win the Super Bowl and it's Philly special and all that stuff. Carson Wentz, I don't want to say hands down, but really probably definitely kind of maybe most likely wins the NFL MVP that year. He was having a ridiculous year with Frank Reich, and they were just crushing it and cruising it. And he goes to an Indianapolis team that brought back T.Y. Hilton and has Michael Pittman Jr. and has Jonathan Taylor and has a very legitimate offensive line that filled Anthony Costanzo's hole with Eric Fisher. I would take Costanzo over Fisher, but then getting Fisher, that's a pretty good way to get back to it. Going with Kelly at center and Quentin Nelson at guard, which is one of the best center guard tandems in the NFL. Combining that with having arguably the best linebacker in the NFL and Darius Leonard on defense and all the other studs and pieces, that's a really good football team. And I feel like in this landscape of the AFC, and this isn't even just related to the Bills, but the Chiefs are getting talked about a lot, and rightfully so. And then the Bills are getting talked about, and people are talking about the Browns because of what they did at the back end of 2020 and then the offseason that they've had and the really good draft that they had. And then Lamar gets talked about, and people forget about the Colts just as a whole. And they're a really good football team. They're well coached, as Joseph said. And as you mentioned, Bruce, I wanted that matchup in the first round, but I did not think it was going to be a pushover matchup, and I was nervous as hell for it. And they were so close to just taking us out and ending our dreams right then and there. They're a really good football team, and that stretch really, really gets me. And the only thing I like about it, it makes me feel a little bit better going on the back end, knowing that we've got 3 of our last 4 at home, and the last 2, in theory, should be against 2 not great football teams in Atlanta and the Jets, knowing that we kind of have that to, I don't want to say fall back on, but I'm going to say that to kind of fall back on that a little bit, makes me feel a little better in terms of how things work out. But yeah, that stretch is brutal. Bye week 7, a little earlier. What are your thoughts on that for the bye week, Bruce? Do you care when the bye week is? Do you like it to be earlier? Do you like it to be more towards the back end? Do you like it to be before the trade deadline? What are your thoughts, feelings around the bye week in general and how this one shook out for the Bills?
I like having the bye week later only because there's a correlation now between bye weeks being later and Super Bowl teams. I don't think it's enough data for there to be a causation at this point, but I do think there's a correlation. If you look at the most recent Super Bowl teams, a lot of them had bye weeks in week 9 or later, a lot of them. And it's about getting healthy at the right time. And a lot of the things that we discuss going into the playoffs is who is healthy and who is hot. It's the 2 H's of going into the playoffs, right? In order to avoid going into hell, you have to be hot and healthy. And so those things together, I think, are aided by the bye week being later. Now, of course, you never really know because based on your injuries, that could come at a perfect time. You could have somebody go out and this team limps into the bye week after just losing 2 games to Kansas City and Tennessee and being real banged up. We're like, daggone, I'm really glad we got that bye week because we need it. We're beat up. So you don't really know because you don't know what each individual game is going to bring as to whether or not the bye week's going to be ill-timed or well-timed. Whether it's ill-timed or well-timed isn't based on what conversations we're having now. It's based on what conversations we're having the week it comes up. But from a macro standpoint, I would prefer to have it later in the year.
Oh, I like the way you put that at the end. Yeah, from a macro standpoint, I prefer to have it later in the year. Again, my idea is always just getting ready for that playoff run and having another week on the back end to heal up, to rest up a little bit, to get things kind of back in order is something I really like. I don't hate how early it is. I mean, it's not like I remember the one year we had a bye week in like week 3 or week 4 or something ridiculous. It is a little early for my taste being in week 7. I don't hate it, but I don't love it, and I would prefer it on the back end as well. Taylor had an interesting question here that I like. What are the odds on how many games we will be favored to win? I'm assuming I think you mean like, I wonder if you mean game by game or overall. I think to answer this in a two-parter, I think the majority of the games the Bills are going to have this year, I think they'll be favored. And in terms of like over-under on wins, I feel like the over-under, this stupid 17-game season in my head, I feel like the over-under is, 12 games? What are your thoughts on that, Bruce?
Probably. I can see 11, between 11 and 12, 11 and a half maybe being the over under for games. I could see it being 12 and a half, but I would think it'd be probably 11 and a half. But as far as favoring goes, I mean, the Bills will be favored against Pittsburgh. I mean, again, barring health, right? Because all this changes week to week. If Josh Allen goes down, that's like a 6-point swing. So Pittsburgh, Miami, Washington, Houston, no Kansas City, probably not Tennessee because it's at Tennessee, and Vegas gives Tennessee 3 points at that point. So I'd imagine we'd probably be a 1-point underdog or something like that to them. Miami, yes. Jacksonville, yes. Jets, yes. Indianapolis, probably. At New Orleans, maybe the same scenario.
Yeah.
New England, yes. At Tampa Bay, no. Carolina, at New England, maybe. Atlanta and the Jets, yes. So you're probably talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, max 5 games where the Bills are not clearly going to be favored, right? So that's 12 games off the bat that we think, assuming health, they're probably going to be favored in those 12 games. And then you got 5 more that are either probably nots or I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'd second that notion. I have a question for you now. Not in our pre-decided notes. And I don't know if this is even applies here, because maybe the answer to this question is, could be just an overall blanketed no. You'll get it once I ask it. With how this schedule is laid out, given how we start out against Pittsburgh, Miami, Washington, Houston, KC, Tennessee, and then go through everything else, at what point in this regular season schedule, based on the teams that we play, at what point in this season will you be confident in knowing who the Buffalo Bills are as a football team?
That's a really good point. It's a really, really, really good question.
I didn't know if you would potentially I didn't know if your answer could potentially be like, I never think, it doesn't matter about how the teams are lined up or how the schedule shakes out. I always think that by, week 11, everyone always knows, or by this thing. I didn't know if how the schedule shakes out would also potentially swing that for you.
I think it's about variance and stimulus. I think once you've seen enough things during the course of that season to know how that coaching staff and that team will react to specific stimuli, I think that's when you know who they are. So every year it could be different based on the way the schedule plays out and when you have played good teams, when you've played bad teams, when you've played man-heavy teams, when you've played zone-heavy teams, when you've played against run offenses, when you've played against pass offenses. So for me, I think Sunday, November 21st.
That's what I got.
Indianapolis at 4 p.m. when that game's over, I think we know who the Buffalo Bills are. And here's the reason why I say that. So, what are you going to see from Pittsburgh this year? You're going to see the same darn thing you saw last year from Pittsburgh. You're going to see under 2.5 seconds as far as time to throw from Ben Roethlisberger, right? But you're going to see it with a run game. So that's one style. Very, very different than what you're going to see from Kansas City. Very different. Very different from what you're going to see at Tennessee. Very different from what you're going to see at Indianapolis. So Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Tennessee, Indianapolis are 4 AFC teams that all made the playoffs last year. All of them made the playoffs last year. Pittsburgh got bumped early, right?
Hmm.
But they made the playoffs last year, and they offer very significant different styles for the Buffalo Bills to face. Once you have seen how the Buffalo Bills handle all of those particular styles, then I think I'll have a good idea with what kind of team I think they're going to have.
Oh, I have literally the exact same point at Indy, and mine's similar to that. Opening up against Pittsburgh, veteran team, well coached, not tremendous in terms of what they're going to do, but they still got a good defense, and they present certain challenges for the Bills. I think they present a different challenge than Miami. I think Washington presents a different challenge than both with what their team is going to look like. Houston, I don't want to completely write off a team, but Houston is whatever. Kansas City is unique in and of itself. The Titans are unique in and of themselves. And then, Miami, Jacksonville, the Jets, and then Indianapolis again. I feel a similar way to you in terms of by Indianapolis, we will have seen a varying amount of styles, of coaching capacities, of game planning, of pros and cons and strengths and abilities from our opponents. And we will have been tested in a variety of ways to the point that we will know how we overall are able to function as a football team. It's also kind of one of the reasons I like having the division games on the back end because of the opponent variability in the early part of the year. I think relatively soon, in November, it maybe is the proper way to say it. But I think by that time in November, we will know who the Bills are, because it's not like, we double dipped on Miami and double dipped on the Jets and faced New England already and this and that. No, we're facing a variety of opponents who have a variety of strengths and weaknesses and who use and apply those strengths and weaknesses at different capacities and at different execution levels to the point that, I think it paints a good picture. And that's why that Indianapolis, New Orleans, New England, Tampa stretch for me is even more important, because I think by the time we get to Indianapolis, we know who the Bills are. And then from that point, everything on, whether it's easy, whether it's hard, we know who the Bills are. And now it's like, okay, like sink or swim, this is who we are. Let's see what we can do. And it's very interesting. I think it's very funny that we knew the topics for what this episode was going to be, but we obviously came up with them independently, and our thoughts have legitimately been almost the exact same thing for a lot of things. I find that very interesting.
You know what I find interesting?
Tell me.
I don't think the Bills have historically put the Super Bowl on their schedule when they released it, but they did this year.
Good point. Oh,
I find that very interesting.
Interesting.
I just think that's like super subtle. It's like blink and you'll miss it kind of thing.
It didn't even register with me. I saw it and was just kind of like, and didn't even bat an eye. Huh. Interesting. I like that a lot. I'm also like that's a really keen pickup. Well done, Bruce. I also like a lot of people in the comments saying Tampa will tell us who we are. And maybe even another comment here from Roman, maybe New Orleans, because their D played well against the Chiefs. They didn't have the offense to finish the job last year. Yeah, their defense did play well. Oh, and a comment here from Joseph about if we sweep the division again and what our thoughts are on that. Bruce, I'll let you go first. What are your thoughts on the Bills sweeping the division again in 2021 as they did in 2020?
I don't think it should be an expectation, because sweeping the division is extremely rare. It is very, very rare. It just doesn't happen very often. But when you have two rookie quarterbacks in your division, in Mac Jones, who the Bills could see twice, and you have Wilson, who the Bills are definitely going to see twice, barring injury, because the Jets don't have anybody else. At least the Patriots have someone who has started for them in the past who could potentially hang on to the job for a little bit. And you have Tua Tagovailoa, who has not played well against the Bills. I think that a lot of it's going to depend on Mac Jones and Tua. I think if Tua takes a step forward with some stylistic changes that Miami's making, what's happening in Miami is fascinating for a lot of different reasons. I don't think we're talking about it enough. I talked a little bit about it on my podcast tonight. That's going to drop tomorrow, but stylistically, Miami is going through a similar change to what the Bills went through in 2019. And that is they're transitioning from these contested catch jump ball receivers to people who are separators. Instead of having, Devontae Parker and Preston Williams be your receivers, it's Jalen Waddle and Will Fuller.
Yep.
And so they're trying to create space for Tua to work. And I find it interesting because are you going for horizontal space or are you going because Fuller and Waddle are vertical separators? Are you trying to make Tua Tagovailoa into a vertical passer? Because coming out, that really wasn't something he was talked about. What was talked about with Tua is that he was a really, really intelligent magician and good ball placement guy in the RPO and quick game. So what are you doing with them exactly? So I think that's going to be fascinating, but it's going to depend on Tua. And then with Mac Jones, if he's someone who comes in and simply is a manager, the Patriots are going to be a play action, power running game, 12 personnel team, which means their quarterback could be less influential on winning than any other quarterback in the division. There is a chance that the Patriots take the keys out of the hands of the quarterback more than any other team in this division this year, which means that even if Mac Jones is bad, the Patriots could still be formidable. They also put a lot of work into their front seven.
Yeah.
Drafted a pass rusher, brought in Judon, brought in Henry Anderson, brought in Davon Godchow. So they made some changes up front. And they've always been coverage over pass rush there in New England because the only people they ever pay are defensive backs. But now they have the front seven to match up with it. And if they really if they turn Mac Jones into a game manager because they want to win now, right? And they're not willing to go through the growing pains of just saying, hey, you know what? Throw 45 times a game. If they're not willing to do that, then that limits the effect that him being bad could potentially have on the team. And the best way for you to beat a team when your quarterback is of significantly less ability is to have him have less impact on the game, which is what they could do.
Very interesting. I stick with your initial sentiment and thought there about sweeping the division is tough regardless. Even if your division is terrible, it's hard to beat teams that have a ton of familiarity with you and about you and who get up a little more just to play you. That's why I think sweeping the division last year was such a nice feather in the cap because it's not a regular occurrence. Even for the best teams, it's hard. Look at Kansas City. Kansas City lost to the Raiders last year. Like even the best teams don't just destroy their division opponents all the time. Those games can be difficult. Those games can be tough. So I don't think it's just an easy slam dunk as a lot of people thinking like, oh, well, yeah, we're just going to sweep, all the teams. And I think, again, a lot of people are forgetting about the fact that New England got a lot better, which is unfortunate because I hate the Patriots, as I think most of us do. Now, Bruce, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to go game by game and give our predictions of whether or not we think it'll be a win or we think it'll be a loss. How do you feel about that?
Okay, I'm willing to do it with this caveat. So historically, my method of picking games has been that I tier all of the quarterbacks and I tier all of the coaches. And then I make decisions based on that because what I do is I pick the differential between quarterback ability. And if it's close enough to call, then I move on to differential and coaching ability. And that helps me pick wins and losses. I have not tiered the quarterbacks or the coaches yet. So I may pick a specific win-loss record tonight, and it may be completely different by the time my actual record prediction podcast comes out later this summer. So with that caveat, I will do it.
Completely fine. I have several caveats as well. None of the specificity of yours with your tiers, which for everyone listening, go back and replay what Bruce just said because his flow chart and tiered system of how he determines wins and losses is an art form and a beautiful thing. I'm in a similar boat with like the caveats. One, we're in May. It's fun to do this and I like doing it, but we're in May. We don't know what things are going to look like come November and December and October, let alone like even just the beginning of the year. Things happen in the offseason, training camp, all these things. There's always those type of things. But yes, I will grant you your caveat as I'm granting myself several. Let's start with week 1. Pittsburgh Steelers. Fun fact, if anyone cares, right now the Bills are listed as a 6-point favorite opening at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bruce, Pittsburgh Steelers, week 1, opening week, could be, I guess, but more should, potentially full house Highmark Stadium for the home opener for the Bills. What do you got? Bills win or Bills lost?
W.
Agreed. We'll move on. Week 2 against the Miami Dolphins.
W.
Oh, this one, I feel similar to this as I did. Not that I was completely overlooking the Jets last year in week 1, but I had my eyes set on week 2 against Miami so much. Yeah, I'm going to go with a win as well. All right, so we're looking at the Bills 2-0. Week 3, Washington.
W.
Same. Week 4, Houston. Lost?
It better be a W.
Yeah, I would. Oh, God, that would be such a letdown. Any potential there's trap gamey type feelings for the Bills because they play the next week against Kansas City and it's on primetime? Any chance we get one of those like college football-y trap game type things where someone in the SEC knows they're playing Bama next week and they're playing a scrub team this week and they get caught?
I think that I would be more open to that line of thinking if we could think back to a single Sean McDermott trap game.
Fair. Absolutely.
Given the fact that we can't, I'm going to continue to acknowledge the fact that trap games exist and also say that I haven't seen a trap game occur during the Sean McDermott tenure. So because of that, I'm going to say I'm not going to err on the side of it.
Okay. Copy that. So we're looking at the Bills. 4-0. Heading into Kansas City for a Sunday night primetime matchup against the Chiefs. As I stated earlier, so I'm excited for this one just because it's the Chiefs. I think it's a huge measuring stick game, a massively anticipated game. Also, I think Sunday Night Football is the elite of elite when it comes to primetime football. NBC's presentation is fantastic. Bills 4-0, heading into Kansas City. Bruce, what do you got?
Loss. I will believe the Bills are going to beat Kansas City when I see it.
Fair. I also was going to go with a loss. I don't think this offseason was about constructing a team to beat Kansas City, but I think currently the way the Bills are constructed on defense, unless potentially the pass rush works out tremendously, and it could, I suppose, I don't think enough is different on the back end to contend with Kansas City's passing attack and just their ability to go for strong and deep and speed and everything. I still don't like the matchup for the Bills versus Kansas City. And yeah, I'm going to go with a loss there as well. So we got the Bills at 4-1 heading into Tennessee the next week. Last game before the bye week, Monday Night Football, ESPN at Tennessee, similar to what happened last year for the Bills. What do you think? Bills going into Tennessee?
Loss.
Oh,
I think the Titans are a bad matchup. One of the things that we didn't talk about at all this particular offseason that we probably should have is that the Bills' run defense last year was still not great. And now part of that, now to be fair, we know part of that was Milano and Edmonds not being healthy the entire year. We know that. And part of it was AJ Klein being able to play. And part of it was Star Lotulelei opting out. But one tech defensive tackle is the worst position group on this team.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's close. You have one player who at one point was a reasonable player at the position. One. That's it. It's Star Lotulelei. And you are hoping he reaches reasonable again after an opt-out year from COVID. So you might not even have one anymore. You might not even have one reasonable player at the one technique position because Harrison Phillips is not someone I feel really good about in a rotation at one tech. He's had some flashy moments, right? But overall, he's been a below average player. Vernon Butler, same thing.
Yeah.
So for me, you have an entire position group with one tech that might have one reasonable player against Derrick Henry and the Titans offense. I just think it's a bad matchup.
That's fair. That's another one for me where, like, you said it with Kansas City, like until the Bills beat Kansas City, like, and you led with it too, the awesome Ric Flair line, to be the man, you got to beat the man type thing. I'll believe it when I see it with Tennessee. I don't fear their defense, and I think the Bills can put up points on that defense, but I do want to know, like, can they stop that rushing offense? I'm still a little... Oh, and see, here's an interesting thought from John. The Titans lost offensive players. Their QB is not legit. I don't think Tannehill is a world beater, but I definitely think he functions well in that offense, and I think he's better than we give him credit for. I see a lot more comments coming in the comments that Tennessee will regress and take a step back. I agree. But similar to you, I don't like the matchup.
So they don't have to be as good as they were last year for the Bills to lose to them.
That's
because styles make matchups. So I agree with everything they're saying. I do think they're going to regress. I made a comment on the pod not too long ago that I think John Robinson got cute. Their GM got cute. Yeah. They were really close with the AFC Championship game, and they got cute. They decided to ignore some red flags, but the Tennessee Titans secondary they've rebuilt that entire secondary in one offseason. The Tennessee Titans picked 2 of the defensive backs that both were being mocked to the Buffalo Bills at 30 in Caleb Farley and, goodness gracious, the nickel corner from Washington. Help me out.
Elijah Molden.
Elijah Molden. I wanted to say Elijah Moore, and I'm like, that's not it. He's the receiver from Ole Miss.
Yeah.
So Elijah Molden is a Titan and
a very good slot corner.
And the Titans are starting to build the defense back to the spot where they inserted some pass rushers there, and they brought in a lot of coverage corners. And I agree that they lost weapons, but AJ Brown's just going to get 190 targets next year.
Yeah, which is fine.
Which is fine for all the people who have AJ Brown in their fantasy team. In addition, Tannehill doesn't have to be great. The joy of that offense is that you see it run with quarterbacks who have specific traits. Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff. You see these players in this system that the recently departed, I say that not because he died, but because he left to Atlanta, Arthur Smith started to roll out with Ryan Tannehill. And I'm not saying Tannehill's a world beater. I'm saying you don't have to be to succeed and put up numbers in that offense, because the offense is a little bit like having training wheels. Heavy play action, naked boot, intermediate routes, jet motion. All these things are designed to put the game on easy mode for quarterbacks. And if you can make on-time intermediate throws and you have enough athleticism to threaten on the naked boot, you can survive. For goodness sake, Gary Kubiak did this with Matt Schaub for how many years in the Houston Texans? Yeah, and now we're just seeing that same basic principles be copied and pasted over to these other reasonable quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield and Ryan Tannehill. I'm not saying he's amazing. I'm saying he doesn't have to be. And he wasn't amazing against the Bills when they beat us.
That's very true. And I think that's some of his comment here from Roman, the things that we're saying, this is what people said about us against Baltimore, though. Now Tennessee has the same problem as Baltimore's offense after free agency, and their defense is still not as good as Baltimore's. I don't think the Baltimore offense presented problems, but because of their lack of a passing game, whether it's the receiving weaponry or Lamar, I think the Titans offense presents a different challenge because of that. The Ravens offense does not have a receiver the caliber of A.J. Brown, who is a monster of a man and a very good football player. And I also think from a passing perspective, and Bruce, if you want to disagree or agree, whatever, I think Ryan Tannehill is a better passer of the football than Lamar, especially in the intermediate areas, especially in the areas that give the Bills defense problems. I don't think the Tennessee offense is going through the same problems as Baltimore's. I think Tennessee presents a different set of problems than Baltimore's does versus the Bills, despite the fact that they're both heavy run offenses.
I think we have a tendency to conflate running offenses together.
Yes.
And Tennessee and Baltimore both have running focused offenses, but they are not the same.
Yes.
They are very, very different offenses, right? And so Greg Roman's offense has never been a significant passing offense, literally ever. He is known as being one of the most creative run game coordinators, but it's always been a pass game that is really tagging along for the run game. And with the Tannehill, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, play action, boot, jet motion, all of these things, it's based on manufacturing a passing offense. The issue that the Ravens have is that they don't manufacture any of their passing offense. None of it is manufactured because all of it is being forced to be in service of the run game.
Yeah.
So when all of your passing concepts are in service of the run game, you don't really have the opportunity to manufacture any of it for yourself. There's no, when was the last time you saw Lamar Jackson, okay, with a naked boot, with a basic high-low concept, right? On two crossing routes. When was the last time you saw that? A deep crosser and then an intermediate cross ever? That's one of the most basic reads you can make for a quarterback to give him a high-low, and then the tertiary option is run the ball. Why wouldn't that be a good fit with Lamar Jackson? It would be a great fit, but it's not part of the Greg Roman offense. So because of that, I think we have a tendency to conflate these two teams as being, well, yeah, they're good running teams who lack weapons. That's true. That's absolutely true. Stylistically, they're very different, which is why Tennessee can still pass the ball.
Very true. Well said. I agree. And just because I'm still probably forever scarred as a Bills fan, I'll go with a loss as well against Tennessee. So we head into the bye week 4-2. Okay, 4-2 bye week. Course correct some things. Come out home against the Miami Dolphins, the second division game of the year. First one also against the Miami Dolphins. Bruce, loss or win for the Buffalo Bills?
Win.
Home against Miami. Win. Same. At Jacksonville.
Win.
Same. At the Jets.
I think the real question for the Jaguars is Urban Meyer going to be retired by the time we face them?
I don't know how you... I know you're an Ohio State guy, and I know he was an Ohio State guy. I am a genuine non-fan of Urban Meyer in many forms, and I hope the Jags fail miserably because of him.
Well, if the Bills can necessitate and kind of expedite his failure, I think we're all going to be a little happy, but I'm taking a W against the Jaguars.
I like it. At the Jets.
W.
Agreed. Now we get into the stretch. The stretch we talked about earlier in this episode with a game that we think by this time the Buffalo Bills will know, kind of who they are. Their identity will be formed a little bit. And we as fans and analysts and breakers, downers of the football game. I know that was a whole bunch of grammar that was incorrect, but it was on purpose.
I love breakers, downers. Let's do that. Let's go with it. Breakers, downers.
I've said it
Welcome
before.
Welcome to breakers, downers with Anthony and Bruce.
If people have said it to me like, that's not a word. I'm like, yeah, but I know it's not a word, but it sounds funny, so I like it. At this point, we would kind of know who the Bills are. Big game, home against the Colts, Sunday, November 21st. Bruce, what do you got?
Loss.
Oh,
I would rather have the Colts early because I don't want Carson Wentz and the Colts offense to get their legs. With Jonathan Taylor, not interested at all. So I'd much rather have them early versus late. And every year, somebody loses one game to a team they probably should beat, right? I think the Bills are a better team than the Colts. So for me, I'm taking an L right here.
Oh, man. Appreciate Kendall. What's good, everyone? Just come to support fellow Buffalo Bills content creators. Love the analysis from Pro Ant and Bruce. Appreciate you, Kendall. Kendall is the producer over for the Air Raid Hour on Buffalo Fanatics. Appreciate you, Kendall. Thank you for joining in. John, I love you and I appreciate you. I disagree that Carson Wentz is washed. I strongly disagree with that. Wow, a lot of comments coming through. Not afraid of Wentz, even with Reich. I'm not afraid, but I definitely have trepidation in just looking at this game and being like, oh, win. Oh,
if you have an opportunity, those of you who are in the comments, go listen to the Locked On Bills pod that Joe Marino did with Benjamin Solak, who writes for the Eagles SB Nation site and is also part of the Draft Network. And he will tell you a little bit about the Carson Wentz scenario and saga that happened with the Eagles. You're going to come out of it thinking a little bit differently, perhaps, than you may, because the Eagles low key for the last couple of years have been one of the most dysfunctional franchises in football, and everyone just kind of blew it under the rug because they won a Super Bowl. So for me, I really, really think that there's a significant opportunity for a rebound there in a familiar environment. And I would much rather get him early in the year because I think there's a chance there's a reasonable quarterback in there.
Yep. And that point ties into what I was going to say, and also into Kendall's question here. Does Wentz give the Colts a better chance to win than they had with Rivers? Bruce and I spoke about this earlier in talking about, Wentz versus Rivers, and Wentz potentially has a lower floor than Rivers, but he has a higher ceiling because of the physical attributes and measurables that he has. And what gets me about this, and it ties in, Bruce, to what you just said and what you mentioned earlier, I think by this time, like the Colts could potentially be in rhythm. They could be in stride, which is a funny pun I hope people got because the Colts are, a horse, and horses.
I see what you did
strides
there.
And stuff. Yeah, thank you. So stupid, but I couldn't not say it. I'm gonna go with a loss as well. Yeah, I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with a loss. I'm super conflicted. I'll go with a loss as well. At New Orleans on Thanksgiving, what do you got?
Win.
Oh, damn. Same. Fair.
For exactly the reason we talked about. I think that there's a chance that they're Diet Ravens if Taysom Hill's the quarterback.
Would you rather face the Saints with Taysom Hill at quarterback or Jameis Winston at quarterback?
Taysom Hill.
Yeah, same. I don't want him to be the quarterback for the sake of Alvin Kamara, who's my keeper in my main fantasy league, but we'll see what happens.
I have both Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill in my dynasty league, specifically to hedge against whoever the quarterback is.
Oh, I like that. That's smart. Well,
listen, you don't win a championship, being a loser in this dynasty league. You gotta be a sharp guy, So I always like to try and make sure that I, share with all the other Buffalo Bills content creators and media who are in the league with me that, just so you know, I got the belt at an undisclosed location. I wear it when I record the podcast.
As you should. Kendall with a comment here. Short week at New Orleans doesn't scare you. Doesn't scare you, Bruce?
Short weeks always scare me, but
I would say.
I don't think that the Bills short week at New Orleans is going to present a worse challenge than they've seen stylistically before with the Ravens. I do think that there's a very reasonable chance that the Bills could look at New Orleans the way that I look at New Orleans, which is there's a chance that if Taysom Hill's the quarterback, they're Diet Baltimore.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. I hate short weeks for everything. I'm all about like turnaround time and rest and prep time and all those things. But I think, Kendall, to echo Bruce's point and answer your question, the short week does scare me, but I don't think what the Saints will be doing is a matchup problem for the Bills. I think we would match up well with the Saints, and that's why I'm also seconding the notion of a win. We continue. So we're into that tough stretch, 1-1 in that tough stretch. Now we're home, Monday Night Football against the New England Patriots. Bruce, what do you got?
Win.
Same. Oh boy. At Tampa Bay, Sunday, December 12th. What do you got?
Loss.
Okay. Same.
They're Super Bowl champions. I don't think it's crazy for me to pick a loss until I see it.
Yeah. And I'm in a similar boat of, I think by this time, again, similar to Indianapolis, I think Tampa Bay is hitting their stride even more. I would have much rather played them in the beginning and hoped for some sort of hangover or some sort of just like, we won the championship, it's whatever. But I think by this time they are potentially cranking into full gear. I'm going to second that loss as well. Carolina next on the schedule. I think this could be a potentially sneaky loss. I'm going to go with a win, but Bruce, what do you got?
I'll take a win. I do think that there's a very reasonable chance that a change in scenery does Sam Darnold well. However, Sam Darnold has been beaten and bludgeoned a little bit by the Buffalo Bills. He might start seeing ghosts a little bit again.
Oh man, that poor guy seeing ghosts. That's poor Sam. Game 2 against New England. Sunday,
Win.
December 26th. Win?
Win.
Oh, I'm going to go with loss. I
Okay.
just think we
Fair.
get got. I just think we get got by somebody. In my mind, we're either going to lose. I think we go 5-1 in the division. I think we either lose one to New England or we lose one to the Pats. I'm sorry, those are the same teams. We either lose one to Miami or we lose one to the Pats. As of right now, I'm more in the Pats camp. I think we split those Pats games somehow, some way. So yeah, I'm gonna go with a loss there at New England. Sunday.
That's not a crazy take at all. And
Okay,
it's not a crazy take because of the timing. By this point, New England will have probably had a chance to work out some of the kinks of the new quarterback, and they probably will have really gotten into the whole minimizing Mac Jones thing that we talked about earlier. So if you're going to lose to him at New England 2 weeks before the end of the regular season, that's probably a reasonable time to do it.
Yeah, and I recognize your comment here of like they don't have a QB in New England, but I mean, just think of the first time the Bills played the Pats, we were a Justin Zimmer hand of God strip away from potentially losing to New England. Cam Newton and that team were driving down our throats to, at worst, tie the game, but also could have beat us. I don't think they're as terrible as everybody thinks. And then you get a full, somewhat regular offseason, whether it's Cam, whether it's Mac. I don't like Cam Newton as a quarterback, but I think they can make it work there. And with the upgrades they've had, I think they've upgraded that team enough to, at the very least, very, very least, be competitive with the Buffalo Bills. And I like Josh was injured, though, Anthony. He was off. Yeah, but the offensive scheme for New England is what potentially gets me, combined with the tape on Allen, and I just can't bet against Belichick too many times. But I recognize it. If the Bills pulled off both and they swept the Pats, I wouldn't be completely shocked or floored or surprised that we got it, but I see them realistically losing one. Now we move past the Pats. We go to Atlanta. Sunday, well, we're home against Atlanta, but I mean, we move on to them in this talk. Sunday, January 2nd, home against the Falcons. Win or loss?
Win.
Agreed. Sunday, January 9th, home against the Jets. Win or loss?
Win.
So you've got 3 losses for the Bills, if I'm keeping...
Oh, I have 4. I have
4.
Kansas City, Tennessee, Indianapolis,
and Tampa
Bay.
So, and I have them. So that's, man, this is so weird. I was immediately like, oh, cool. So 12-4. Nope. 13-4 for you.
I will never get used to that. I will never get used to it.
And I don't like odd numbers. I don't like it. So you have them at 13-4. I have them at 12-5. I think there could be a couple of games in there that could be swayed. Oh, interesting comment from Roman here. He thinks we lose to Atlanta. Interesting. Mainly because of Kyle Pitts. I just don't think they present enough things on defense to make me worried and or be scared. And I love their weaponry. And Matt Ryan's better than I think people give him credit. But I think I like that matchup enough for the Bills. Although I am interested to see how they match up with Kyle Pitts. Ooh, interesting. 13. So if we're sitting here saying the Bills are 13-4, Bruce, for you, granted, we're not looking at all the other teams. Where do you think, if you had to guesstimate, where that puts us in the AFC landscape? 2 seed?
Yeah.
3 seed? 2 seed?
2 seed for sure. I think Atlanta with Pitts and putting the pictures together and saying, well, the Bills struggled against tight ends last year and Pitts is a really good tight end. Hey, they might have trouble. We need to talk about the fact that the most successful rookie tight end in the history of the league was Jeremy Shockey, who had less than 900 yards. We need to talk about that. Listen, so I understand that Kyle Pitts is an incredible talent, okay? But what you are banking on is you are banking on him doing something that has literally never been done before, which I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying I wouldn't bet on it. I wouldn't bet on something happen that's never happened before, which is a rookie tight end being 1,000-yard significant impact player. The most successful rookie tight end in the history of football had less than 900 yards receiving. So I do think that we need to kind of pump the brakes a little bit on the Kyle Pitts hype. I think somebody on Twitter, we were talking about not too long ago, someone took him with the 2nd pick in the 3rd round of the fantasy football draft.
Mm.
And I was like, I'm sorry, what now? And this
Wowzer.
not a dynasty draft, straight up.
Wow, just straight up.
Just
Oh,
straight up standard scoring. And I was like, what now? So
wow.
I do think that that's pretty fascinating when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons. And I understand that. Also, the Bills were really good against tight ends in 2019, and they were bad against them in 2020. And the 2020 year was the year that Milano and Edmonds were hurt. So I don't think this Bills are bad against tight end things. I don't necessarily think it's something we should ignore, but I don't know if it's necessarily a narrative that's going to stick. We'll see. If they're still bad against tight end when the variable has been isolated and Milano and Edmonds are healthy and they're still bad against tight ends, then I'll freak out about it.
I love that Jeremy Shockey stat. Ironically, I'm wearing a Miami Hurricane shirt right now. I love Jeremy Shockey at the U, and then he went to the Giants, who I did not like. Oh, but he was so fun. And he was even pretty decent on New Orleans, helped them get a Super Bowl ring as well. Ooh, so 13-4, 12-5 for me. Get out of that 13-4. How many games do you have that potentially could be? So if we use 13-4 as your baseline, what's your realistic max that they could potentially be, and what's your realistic floor in terms of what they could be record-wise?
I think you go as high as 15-2 and as low as 11-6.
I think
that's my range.
What if you had to bank on two non-negotiable, these are going to be losses no matter what are your two?
Oh, you got to take Kansas City and Tampa Bay because they were Super Bowl teams last year.
That's fair. I think that's fair. Ooh. Bruce, I want to see your thoughts on this, because you and I are both very pro cornerback and are both still hurting in our hearts over the non-drafting of Asante Samuel Jr. Ben here says Levi Wallace is brutal. We need help in Steven Nelson. And then John followed up in his comment saying that Dane Jackson will take that spot. How do you feel about the corner 2 spot right now? Because I don't love it, but I don't think Levi Wallace is brutal. I disagree on that, but what do you think there?
I don't think Levi Wallace is brutal. I think Levi Wallace is limited. And I think you could insert Dane Jackson in that spot and you'd be just as limited. You'd be maybe a little bit less limited. But why is it, qualitatively, why is it that we're limited with Levi Wallace? Is it because he doesn't understand his assignments? No, of course not. Is it because he's not a good tackler? No, that's not it. So what is it that's making you be limited on defense? And it's the fact that he's not a good athlete. Putting Dane Jackson in that spot doesn't fix that. Yeah. Dane Jackson is also not a good athlete. So I don't think that you're going to get CB2 upgrades in a significant way. I think Dane Jackson could be a little bit better, could be a smidge better than Levi Wallace. You never know, but he's still not going to offer you that CB2 ceiling that you would like to see. And I would be very happy with Steven Nelson. I'm not willing to say that Levi Wallace is, brutal. And I don't think Dane Jackson is brutal by any means. I just think that their presence limits your options, because what give you options are traits. Eric and I talked about this when we did a film room for Josh Allen. The thing that gives you options as a coach is traits as a player. You show me a coach who has options, I'll show you players who have traits. That's the way that works. And if you don't have a lot of traits, you don't get a lot of options. And that's what happens when you have a limited CB2.
Would you take Steven Nelson hands down over Levi and Dane at this point?
Yes.
If the Bills sign Steven Nelson, is he penciled in CB2 right there?
Yes.
Agreed. I think that's my thing with it. I know, because I know people a lot. I want to keep pulling up the comments, but now everybody's, starting to come through and ask different questions. I think to answer a lot of the things that are coming with the Levi and the Dane comments and thoughts. Yeah, it's not that what I'm seeing Dan's comment now, Levi, because this is the sentiment that's being echoed. Levi's a liability in coverage. He's not fast. He's not physical. He's not rangy. He just has no strong points in his game. I like Dane a lot better, in my opinion, but Nelson would be good, even though he's Diggs' son. Good burn. I don't think Levi's bad. I also don't think Dane Jackson's bad. I like them both. I just don't think they offer you anything, much to your point, Bruce, about what they lack. I think in what they lack limits what you can do and limit your scheme versatility in terms of what you can do on the back end. And that's more of a better point. Levi isn't a liability. He just makes us predictable. I think that's more of a fair comment, because if you're somehow running man and single high, you kind of know the safety has to shade over to Levi's side. Or most of the time, we have to see what the zone coverage is going to look like, because it's going to be zone coverage. And as I'm starting to pull everything through, Dane doesn't miss tackles. No, Dane is a very good tackler. I like him.
Neither does Levi Wallace. Levi Wallace has a really good tackling efficiency.
Yeah, I just don't. My issue isn't the tackling aspect. My issue is, can you cover one-on-one against the not even elite, but top tier level wide receivers? Can you play man coverage or function in a scheme that allows us to throw different coverages and different looks on the back end and not be predictable to the point where, what was it? By the time it was like week 4, week 5, and a lot of people were coming out and it was just kind of known, like, well, the Bills are either playing cover 3 or they're playing quarters. Like, that's who they are. It's cover 3 or it's quarters. And like, that's what it's going to be. And granted, you can play one scheme or even 2 and just be so great at it that you can shut some people down, but it's hard in today's NFL. And somebody like Nelson, I would really appreciate coming in, just because he gives us scheme versatility. And even when you throw another name into the ring with Richard Sherman, I like Richard Sherman. I like his length. I like where his head is at. I like his leadership and all those things. But I don't know if he offers any potential scheme versatility for us. And now we're starting. Sorry, I'm speaking and also getting comments at the same time. The comments of, so watch Dane cover the top receiver in Arizona, meaning DeAndre Hopkins. And then another comment here from Spin, Dane shut down Hopkins in the end zone on one-on-one. I recognize Dane looked good in that game, and I point to that regularly. However, using like one game or one individual play as the barometer for what a player is not taking sample size into account whatsoever. I love the play on 3rd down against DeAndre Hopkins on the opening drive against the Cardinals, and the fact that he went one-on-one with one of the best wide receivers in the NFL and legitimately made a play on the ball and caused an incompletion. But seeing that one play and then taking it to the point of, well, Dane can lock up anybody, I just think that's very dramatic. That's very dramatic.
We just refuse to acknowledge sample size sometimes. We do it with Christian Wade. We do it with Dane Jackson. We do it with these players who we only notice temporarily, and we notice them because they did something good. And when that happens, we extrapolate that play over all of our hypothetical snaps that we assign to this person in our head. Well, he looked really good on that one snap against DeAndre Hopkins. Therefore, if every single snap was against DeAndre Hopkins, he would look that good every snap. And that's not how this works, because you have to still pay attention to who Dane Jackson is as a player, not necessarily what you've seen from him in one rep. It's who is he? Who was he at Pitt? Why was he a 7th round? Why was he a 7th round pick? There's a reason for that. A lot of people coming in thought he was a nickel. He was a scrappy, thin-framed, aggressive tackler who was quicker than fast, and they thought, well, maybe he's a nickel. And the Bills played him on the outside because a lot of those players who don't necessarily have the long speed and you think you have to put them inside at nickel, they kind of work on the outside in zone schemes because you can kind of hide some of the lack of long speed. So there's a factor right there. But we just ignore sample size in service of the narrative. We do it with every single underdog, undrafted 7th round pick that rolls through here. That's just part of what they do.
Very true.
Levi Wallace allowed a passer rating into his coverage last year of 79.4. He's not a liability by any means. In fact, of the games that he was in coverage, he gave up 100 yards twice. Here are the yards. Let's go ahead and read them off. Here are the yards allowed by Levi Wallace by game. 4, 107, 24, 0, 17, 34, 11, 146, 25, 25, 0, 46, 6, 5, 12.
Mm,
I mean, I think we extrapolate the good stuff with Dane Jackson and we extrapolate the bad stuff with Levi Wallace. That's what we do.
Yes. 1,000%. 1,000%. This is something I want to, Bruce, I know you'll like this. John, I appreciate what you're saying. So John has several comments about, because you and I were proponents of getting a rookie CB2 and putting them in there. So John's had several comments here, but do we expect a rookie to do this, meaning like excel in coverage and be able to have scheme versatility?
Yes.
He said, so yes, for you, they don't have sample size either. And
yes, they do. They have sample size. They have sample size in coverage in college. And mind you, Tre'Davious White and Marshawn Lattimore were battling it out for Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year. Defensive Rookie of the Year probably should have gone to Trey White, went to Marshawn Lattimore. Corners come in and may have an impact all the time. That's extremely easily translatable position to the NFL, especially if you run a lot of man coverage. If you run a lot of man coverage, CJ Henderson last year played perfectly reasonably for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Jalen Ramsey came in and played really well right off the bat. It's extremely positive, especially if you have a big athletic corner who can play in man coverage. A lot of players can come in and have an impact as a rookie. So absolutely, 100% they can do that. And
John, your comment here, what are you talking about? College is not the pros. Correct. College is not the pros. What I think and when we say sample size, I think you are confusing sample size and just saying that it's the same thing as like a production type thing. Because granted, no rookie has, sample size in the NFL or no production in the NFL, but to liken it to something that Bruce said earlier, the traits aspect, that's what you are projecting at the NFL level. So I wanted certain rookie corners. Well, they would have been rookies, but I wanted certain corners in the draft, and they didn't have to be a first rounder or a second rounder. I would have even taken guys in the third and even potentially in the fourth if we had it, that their traits and their abilities and their strengths combined with the sample size in college. Granted, college is not the pros, completely agree, but their traits and their play style is readily translatable to the NFL game. Granted, you can never guarantee that for anything, but there's something to be said for traits. And I am always, especially if we're evaluating talent, traits over production all day. You have to recognize the traits and how they're translatable to the NFL. And Bruce, I'm going to let you do this one because it's related to the coverage versus pass rush debate. So this is why John has made this comment multiple times. So that's why they chose to go with the pass rush to help out the corners. What are your
thoughts? So first off, in regards to the sample size discussion, when it comes to, there is no hypocrisy happening here where we're applying something to Dane Jackson, Levi Wallace, but then not to a rookie corner, because the rookie corner, if drafted high, Asante Samuel, we have seen Asante Samuel run in man coverage with athletic, really talented receivers down the field. We never saw that from Dane Jackson, not even in college. So it carries over all the way. Dane Jackson coming out of college was not known as someone who could keep up with long speed. We have seen that already from Asante Samuel Jr. So yes, the college does count. So Dane Jackson has not done the thing that you were hoping he is going to do at any point in his entire football career. That doesn't mean he can't do it. That doesn't mean he can't do it at all. That means he has not done it. So what you're doing is you're projecting. You're projecting that he can, having never really seen him consistently do it. So Asante Samuel can play that. He can play in man coverage, which we just established is one of the goals of us getting a better CB2 is so you can run more man. That's the point. If you have a limited corner, you can't run as much man as you'd like to. So in regards to they chose to go with pass rush to help out the corners. Those two things are symbiotic. We know that. Pass rush and coverage are symbiotic, but you can't eliminate one in favor of the other. When I say coverage is more important than pass rush, I don't mean pass rush is not important. What I mean is I think one impacts the other more than the other impacts the one. But you can't say we're going to ignore coverage, right? And we're just going to have a really limited player on the back end and our pass rush is going to make up for it, because you can't have it 100 and 0. Now, I'm not saying we have it 0 on the back end. I'm saying that historically, what Sean McDermott has seen is he has seen his CB2 be a get-by guy all the time. A get-by guy. It's always been Chris Gamble and a get-by guy. Then it was Josh Norman and a get-by guy. Now it's Tre'Davious White and a get-by guy. He doesn't believe significantly in the CB2 position. He never has. No. And that's pretty obvious from the things that he has done. So because of that, I'm not expecting to get any sort of significant investment, but it's not going to stop me from realizing that the Bills can't throw multiple different coverages at a potential quarterback that you would like to hold on to the ball longer. So, your pass rush can get there. They can't throw those things because they don't have those arrows in the quiver. And they don't have those arrows in the quiver because they don't have a CB2 who can run man.
I love your arrows in the quiver reference just now. That was fantastic. I'm sorry to keep even going with it, John, but you say Asante Samuel man corner struggling in zone in college. I strongly disagree with that. Asante Samuel's pattern recognition and spacing in zone, and it's really something to behold. If Asante Samuel was 6 foot and 195 pounds, he would have been a top 3 corner in this draft, in my opinion. He does so many things that are strong and needed in the NFL. He was someone who I wanted more in the second, but I would have been fine taking in the first just because of, again, that scheme versatility, because he can play man, but his zone coverage is very, very strong. If you think that he struggled in zone, that's fair. More power to you. But I would suggest you try and find a way to see more tape of him. He is a very strong corner in both aspects, but especially in zone with his pattern recognition and ability to decipher what's going on and his reads. And he's a very good player in zone, very good player in zone.
One of those rare corners that you can see in off man and in zone and can see things developing in front of him.
Yes.
And that's the type of player you want to have in off man, and you want to have them in zone because they recognize the things that are happening in front of them. And sometimes you can have a player like Levi Wallace, who's a smart player, and he can see things developing in front of him. He just doesn't have the burst to actually get there. It doesn't really matter if your pattern recognition is good if you can't make a play on the ball.
That's exactly it. That's a very good point. And I think that's the part with Levi and Dane just overall. And I like them both, and I know you do as well. I'm not distraught that, even if we don't bring in someone else, I'm not distraught that corner 2 looks like it's going to be between Levi and Dane Jackson. I don't think that's terrible. I think there's a lot of teams that will be in a worse off position. I just think, and Bruce, I know you echo this as well, that it just limits the scheme versatility we can have on the back end. Are they liabilities? No. Are we sitting looking at a glaring hole at CB2? No. But there are definitely opportunities where we can improve or upgrade that position, with the emphasis being improve or upgrade being the fact that we would be more scheme versatile in the defense. And to your point earlier, do things that could potentially keep quarterbacks in the pocket a little longer, or make them hold onto the ball a half second longer, which in today's NFL is huge, considering so many teams are trying to get the ball out in like 2.5 seconds, which is just wild. Yeah,
Which is why coverage is so important. Cough, cough, hint, hint, wink, wink.
I know. I was waiting for that coverage. Oh.
It's coverage because people getting the ball out quicker. And we have quarterbacks who can break the pocket and escape pressure. And you need to be able to play coverage on the back end longer because you have players creating in the second phase as the quarterbacks stylistically change. Cough, cough. Sorry, I had something in my throat there. It was really weird. Really super, super duper weird. It could be worse. We could be the Jets. The Jets have probably the worst cornerback room in the entire league.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. That was an interesting, I thought we were going to be under an hour for this episode. I should have known better. And we spoke about it offline. I shouldn't even said it. And then I also thought we potentially get off into some more tangents, and we really didn't as much. We really just kind of got into that CB tangent down at the end. But regarding the Bills 2021 schedule and the breakdown of it, what do you got? Anything else, Bruce? Any closing thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, anything you love, anything you're dreading, something particular to note, or something you're looking towards, or just kind of overall summing up the info we already broke down in this episode?
it's as optimistic as you probably have ever been going into a scheduling season right now. Because last year it was, is Josh Allen going to break out? Josh Allen broke out already, which means when you go in and you start looking at quarterback matchups, a lot of them favor the Bills for the first time since Jim Kelly. When was the last time that Bills fans go into the year and go, yeah, our quarterback's better than your quarterback for the majority of the games? Ever? I mean, Jim Kelly, even at his prime, right, had Dan Marino twice a year. And I don't know if this is, I mean, Dan Marino's better than Jim Kelly, right? We all know this, right? Like, is that a hot take?
That Dan Marino's better than Jim Kelly?
Yeah, is that a hot take? Like, is that going to get me like punted off the internet?
That maybe Dan Bills fans.
That Dan Marino was a better quarterback than Jim Kelly. I don't think that's crazy. The Bills were a better team for sure. But that right there is a scenario where, it's probably hasn't happened in over 20 years where the Bills look at a schedule and say, yeah, my quarterback's better than yours for the vast majority of the games. And that's an awesome spot to be in.
That's a very important takeaway. I have a one last tangent / side question. And also, John, I commented back to you in the chat. Never apologize for getting us into a tangent and appreciate that. Oh, here you went through the comment there. Sorry to get into a tangent. Love your guys' work. Appreciate you, John. Never apologize for getting us off into a tangent. It's part of it. I love the organic back and forth, and the engagement from everyone in the chat is one of the major reasons we love doing this and get to do this. So never apologize for having thoughts, questions, concerns, opinions, beliefs, or whatever. It stimulates conversation. It stimulates discussion, and never apologize for that. You're fantastic. Question for you, Bruce. If the Bills draft Dan Marino instead of Jim Kelly, do they win a Super Bowl?
Oh, wow. Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
I'll go with it. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do
it. That's something that I've often, because the Bills came so close, obviously, and going to 4 straight. And you look at the career of Dan Marino, which is one that Bills fans always, hate Miami and overlook the Dolphins. But think of what it was like to be Dan Marino or even a Dolphins fan throughout those times of, you got this guy who, is the only person, granted, quarterback wins are not a thing, but how people like to attribute things. Dan Marino and the Dolphins team, they're the only team to beat the 85 Bears. And then they go to a Super Bowl real early in his career. And you got you have a coach like Don Shula and all these things. And it's just like, oh my God, we're going to be great for, how many years, for forever. And then all of a sudden the Bills come around, and every year it was like, well, we got like arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, and they could just never get over Buffalo, never get over the Bills. The Bills being the foil to the Dolphins for so long and getting in the way of any hope of Dan Marino getting to another Super Bowl is such an underappreciated storyline, and something that I know bothers Dolphins fans and probably also bothers Dan Marino. But I've always thought of that in the back of my mind because I love Jim Kelly, and I think he what he did for the city and for the team was tremendous. But I don't think it's crazy to say that Dan Marino was the better quarterback. And putting Dan Marino, granted, there's so many dominoes. Like if Marino was on the Bills, do they even get to the point where like the draft picks are the same and they put the same team together, so on and so forth, and all those things? Like it's a massive butterfly effect. But I've always thought there was an interesting thing. Like if you just literally could pluck, like if you just took out Jim Kelly and then put in Dan Marino, what that team would potentially look like. Not that I would want to, because it hurts my heart because Jim Kelly is amazing and I wouldn't trade him for the world. But oof, man.
Dan Marino in 1984 had one of the greatest single seasons in the history of football, and we don't talk about it at all.
Unbelievable. That's the
5,084 yards, 48 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. It's 1984, ladies and gentlemen. That is a crazy season in 2021.
Yeah.
In 1984, it was something out of a fairy tale. Maybe one of the greatest seasons any quarterback has ever had, ever.
Yeah.
In 1984.
People weren't chucking the football around like that.
I'm not going to tell you how old I was in 1984, but it's a scenario where it was pretty good. Not going to lie.
Pretty good.
was pretty good.
And he did it with, even throughout his later into the 80s, into the 90s, he was always a guy who did it without, never had like a stud running back at the time where that was an important position in the NFL. He had good weapons, but he never had like an elite or true number one to the point where it was always like Marino to so-and-so, Marino to so-and-so. He never had that. It's a very interesting concept, but that's an interesting point from John. That just shows you need to have some balance. We did have Thurman. He's a guy. Oh, it hurts my heart.
You got to build a better team. And the Bills had Polian,
what they did.
And the Miami Dolphins didn't have Polian.
That's a very good point. This is also a good comment related to this. Was Dan Marino as good of a leader as Kelly was? Because I think that goes a long way. That's a very fair point as well. Like the team, you don't know if the team chemistry, the dynamic, how much it's changed or impacted. I think you could very well make that, especially if you've watched like the Football Life documentaries or the Four Falls of Buffalo and all that stuff, knowing like how close these guys were and how integral Jim Kelly was to the fabric of the team and the culture of the city is something you almost can't replace, even if you found someone with a better scheme fit or talent fit. And
I am not going to go down the road because we don't have enough time. I'm not going to go down the leadership is important, but it's also crazily overrated. I am not going to go down that road right now because we go another 2 hours. Leadership is important. It is. It matters. It's also horribly overrated because some of the best quarterbacks were terrible leaders, and they have lots of Super Bowl rings. Aaron Rodgers has never been lauded for his leadership skills. Ben Roethlisberger's never been lauded for his leadership skills. Joe Flacco has never been lauded for his leadership skills. Trent Dilfer was never lauded for his leadership skills. All these players have rings. Right?
Yes.
All these players have rings. Eli Manning was never lauded for his leadership drills. He's got 2.
Yes.
So it matters. It's a thing that matters. Having it's better than not having it, but we have a tendency to romanticize it a little bit in our head.
That's very true. I think if we wanted this pod to go for another like 4 hours, we could lead with that leadership topic and then talk about why you should always take a running back in round 1.
Why do you hate me? I came on your show. We went for almost 2 hours again. Why do you hate me?
I'm sorry.
I don't understand.
I apologize.
I'm here for you, man. I thought we were friends. I thought you would help me move if I asked.
I would, but that would require mainly just because, well, 1, I would want to help you, but 2, and mainly it's because of number 2, then I would be like, oh my God, I get to see Bruce's face. And I would also see like where he would live. Oh my God. Oh man. I feel like you would
let you into the fortress of solitude.
Right. And I feel like it would be like, I'd be like going up to the door to announce my presence or whatever. And there would be like a retinal scanner and like fingerprint ID and like all my electronic devices would be confiscated at the door.
Absolutely. 100%, man. 100%. I've been live for 3 hours tonight. 2 hours with you, and then I did a live pod with the Bruce exclusive from 7 to 8. So at this point, if someone were to come to my door right now, they would put their eye up to the retinal scanner and they'd get more than they counted for, I think. Because I don't have the patience right now to deal with it.
No more mental bandwidth.
That's right. I'm out. I'm out of gas. No, I'm done.
That's fantastic. I appreciate you as always. And
dude, thanks for having me.
No, I mean, thank you for coming aboard. I know how you are a hugely important woven piece into the fabric of Bills Mafia and content creation and the breakers downers community that is Bills content. And I know you're busy just in general, let alone on Thursdays when you have your live show earlier in the evening. So to take the time to, oh, yikes, my little voice cracked there. I'm coming a real boy soon. For you to take the time and jump on with me. Again, I know we plan for less, but here we are, lo and behold, time and time again. The fact that you are willing to ride with me, this late again, and, it's greatly appreciated. I always appreciate you come aboard. You're phenomenal. And just in case people don't know you or where you are, where they can find you, let the good people know.
I'm Bruce Nolan. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. John's on his way with a Red Bull, so I appreciate that. My pod, the Bruce Exclusive, drops every Thursday and Friday on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network, and I am also historically live on Thursdays. I think I'm going to keep doing the live show for a little bit longer. maybe a month or two longer, and then we'll just kind of see where it goes. Historically,
Okay.
I have not been a live show sort of guy,
No,
so
you have not.
I might just go back to 2 pre-recorded pods. We don't know, but I appreciate, dude. I really appreciate you having me. I always really enjoy it. It's been 2 hours the last 2 times we've done it, and it's been awesome both times.
Oh,
So
thanks, man.
can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys at Cover One. Have been unbelievably gracious to me. So I'm all about it. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, hell yeah. You are well worth it. You're one of my favorite people in the community. I love you a lot and appreciate you. And thank you for the kind words. It genuinely means a lot to me as a person I respect. So to hear you, say that to me, it's tremendous. And check out Bruce if you guys haven't already, but I'm assuming a lot of you have based on all the love that you get in the chat every time, but especially tonight. Check out Bruce. Check out the Bruce exclusive. He's phenomenal. Everything he does. Also one of the best Twitter handles in the universe, which is also fantastic. Hashtag dogs over people. I, of course, am Anthony, your regular host here on Disguise Coverage. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2 ANT. Give me a follow on the old Twitter. Wherever you are listening to this podcast or consuming this podcast, please rate and review and subscribe. Check out all the other great content on Cover One Buffalo podcast with Greg and Aaron, the Hoof podcast with Sterling, Eric B, and Anthony Romeo. I appreciate all you guys, everybody flooding the chat now with the well wishes. Great show, guys, and appreciate you, John. Good night, Cody. Godspeed, everyone. Thank you for riding with us this time. We spoke. We went a little longer than anticipated, but the engagement's still up there. The views are still up there. Whether you're watching live, rode with us live, watching the video, listening to the audio, whatever. Thank you so much for your support. It means a tremendous amount to us. Help you and your family and friends and loved ones all stay safe and are healthy and are getting everything you want out of life. As always, go Bills, and I'll see you next week.